From the moment I became aware of the world, I was labeled illegitimate child. My entire childhood was spent under scornful glances, whispered gossip, and the cold silence of a father who never dared to call me his son. I grew up with my mother, living like a shadow on the fringes of the Holloway family. And then came the day he passed away, and I walked into the reading of his will, where my siblings divided hundreds of millions of dollars among themselves. As for me, just a thin envelope. They mocked, thinking it was a joke, but they didn't know that within that letter lay a secret powerful enough to bring them all down. Hello, my name is Murphy Dalton. I'm 29 years old, living in a small apartment in the suburbs of Newark, New Jersey, where the quiet streets are covered with golden leaves every autumn. My life is nothing extraordinary. I work as a manager at a small warehouse, where I spend my days counting crates, checking invoices, and trying to avoid the curious stares of colleagues who know too much about my past. They don't say it out loud, but I know they whisper behind my back, "That's the Holloway bastard." The word bastard is like a scar that never heals, clinging to me since childhood. I grew up with just my mother, Lennon Dalton. She's nearly 60 now, frail with a few strands of gray in her hair. My mother is a simple woman, always wearing old but clean clothes, her face carrying a sad smile. She did all kinds of jobs to raise me, selling goods at the market, tutoring neighborhood kids, or working part-time at the library. She never complained, but I know she endured endless gossip. People called her the abandoned mistress of a wealthy businessman. They whispered behind her back, pointed as she passed by, as if she were a stain on society. But to me, she was my entire world, the only person who never turned her back on me. My childhood wasn't filled with lively birthday parties or warm family holidays. Instead, it was a long string of disdainful looks and cruel taunts. Bastard, fatherless kid. That's what the neighborhood children called me. I still vividly remember the day a group of older kids cornered me on my way home from school. They pushed me down, laughing. "Who do you think you are? A Holloway? You're just trash." I curled up, trying to shield my face, but their words cut like knives, slicing into the fragile pride of a young child. I never told my mother about those humiliations, knowing it would break her heart even more. As for my father, he was Jetson Holloway, a name known across America. He was the master of a financial empire, a powerful man in expensive suits with a perfect smile gracing the covers of business magazines. To the world, he was an exemplary entrepreneur, a devoted husband, and a wonderful father to his two sons, Alvin Holloway and Kason Holloway. But to me, he was an enigma, a figure both close and distant. He occasionally visited my mother and me, usually late at night when the dim streetlights cast shadows over our small street. He'd come into our apartment wearing a long coat, his face hidden under a hat, as if afraid of being recognized. During those visits, he often brought a small gift, a toy car, a book, or sometimes just an awkward hug. I still remember the scent of his expensive cologne, foreign yet warm, stirring in me both longing and resentment. He never stayed long. He spoke to my mother in a warm, affectionate tone, but her eyes always carried a silent weariness. Once I overheard her ask, "Jetson, when will you tell the world the truth?" He only shook his head in silence and left. I knew he loved my mother and perhaps me too, but he lacked the courage to acknowledge us publicly. He had a legitimate family, a wife named Selena, and two sons raised to inherit his empire. I was just a secret, a hidden corner he didn't want the world to see. The rare times I met my half-brothers, Alvin and Kason, are memories I wish I could erase. When I was about 10, my father brought me to the Holloway mansion, a lavish estate that felt like another world. The walls glimmered with gold, the carpets were thick and cloud-like, and the servants bowed respectfully. I stood there in worn-out clothes and scuffed shoes, feeling like an outsider in that opulent world. Alvin, the eldest, tall and cold, looked at me like I was an insect. Kason, slightly younger, smirked and called me the bastard right in front of our father. I bowed my head, trying to hide my humiliation, but the most painful part was that my father said nothing. He just stood there, his gaze averted, letting me endure their insults. One time, it was even worse. Alvin, then 18, shoved me to the floor in the sprawling living room of the mansion. "You think you belong here?" he growled, then slapped me across the face. I didn't fight back, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew I had no right. My father was in the corner of the room watching it all, but he just turned away as if I didn't exist. When my mother came to pick me up, she hugged me tightly without asking a single question, but I knew she felt the pain in my heart. That night, she sat by my bedside, stroking my hair, and said, "You are everything to me. No matter what the world says, you are my treasure." Those words were the only light in the darkness of my childhood. I grew up with a heart full of contradictions. I loved my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything to protect me. But I also resented my father, the man who gave me life but left me to live in shame. I never understood why he couldn't stand up for us. He was a powerful man who could buy the world, yet he lacked the courage to claim me as his son. Some nights I dreamed of him standing before the entire Holloway family, holding my mother's hand in mine, declaring that we were his true family. But when I woke, I only saw the cracked ceiling of our small apartment, heard my mother's soft coughs from the next room, and reality pressed heavily on my chest. My life in Newark passed quietly and monotonously. I worked at the warehouse from dawn to dusk, trying to live a life unnoticed by others. But no matter how hard I tried, the label bastard followed me like a shadow. Colleagues whispered, neighbors gossiped, and every time I saw the Holloway family on TV, my father smiling brightly beside Alvin and Kasen at glamorous events, a sharp pain pierced my chest. They had everything: fame, wealth, recognition, while I had only my mother and a past full of scars. But deep down, I knew my mother was the reason I kept going. She wasn't just the one who raised me, she taught me how to stand tall against the world's scorn. Every time I wanted to give up, to scream to the world that I wasn't a bastard, she'd take my hand and gently say, "You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just live true to yourself, and that's enough." And I tried. I lived quietly, worked hard, and tried to build a life not defined by the Holloway name. Life seemed to settle into that quiet stillness. But on one fateful day, everything changed. That day, I returned home after a long shift at the warehouse, my hands heavy, my clothes reeking of sweat. Our small apartment was as it always was, with the faint glow of a yellow light illuminating the worn walls. But as I stepped inside, I immediately sensed something was wrong. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes red as if she had just been crying. I froze, my bag slipping from my shoulder to the floor. "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice faltering. She looked up, her eyes filled with pain but trying to stay calm. "Murphy, sit down," she said, her voice trembling. I obeyed, my heart pounding. Then she spoke, each word like a knife. "Your father, Jetson Holloway. He's gone. Last night he had a sudden heart attack and didn't make it." I don't remember how long I sat there, only that the world around me suddenly became a blur. Jetson Holloway, the father I both loved and hated, was gone. He had abandoned me once again, this time forever. I didn't cry, but in my chest a sharp pain spread, as if someone were squeezing my heart. I was grieving not for the loss of a true father, he had never truly been one in that sense, but for the loss of the chance that one day he might look at me and say, "Murphy, you are my son." Then my mother took my hand, her touch cold yet warm in the way only she could be. "We're going to your father's funeral," she said, her voice resolute. "We need to say goodbye to him one last time." I looked at her, wanting to protest. I knew what awaited us there. Scornful glares, cruel whispers. But when I saw the strength in her eyes, the resilience I had always admired, I couldn't argue. She wasn't going to prove anything to anyone. She was going to bid farewell to the man she once loved, despite the shame he had brought her. I nodded, though my heart was filled with dread. On the day of the funeral, the sky was gray with a light drizzle falling like belated tears. My mother and I stood before the mirror in our small apartment, preparing for a day I knew would be anything but easy. I wore an old suit, the jacket slightly tight at the shoulders, while my mother donned a simple black dress, her hair neatly tied back. We looked like outsiders out of place in the world we were about to enter. But my mother took my hand and gave a sad smile. "As long as we have each other, that's enough." The funeral was held at an old stately church in the heart of Manhattan, where everything exuded extravagance. Gleaming cars lined up in rows, and men in expensive suits and women in dazzling dresses stepped out holding black umbrellas. The media swarmed the entrance, cameras flashing incessantly. I heard whispers, "The Holloway family is here." And then I saw them. Selina, my father's lawful wife, walking with a regal air, her blonde hair perfectly styled. Beside her were Alvin and Kasen, my half-brothers, their eyes cold as if they owned the world. They were the epitome of a powerful, flawless family. No blemishes, no stains, except for me. My mother and I entered the church, trying to be as discreet as possible. But the moment we appeared, the air seemed to freeze. Eyes turned toward us and whispers rose like a wave. "That's Holloway's mistress," someone said. "And that boy must be their bastard." I bowed my head, trying not to listen, but the words pierced my skin like needles. My mother squeezed my hand as if to lend me her strength. We found a secluded corner near the back of the church, hoping to say goodbye to my father in peace. But peace was never meant for us. As the ceremony began, Selina stepped up to the podium, her voice ringing out smooth as a well-rehearsed speech. She spoke of my father as the perfect husband, a devoted father, a brilliant businessman. Then Alvin and Casson stood up, each sharing a few words about him. They talked about hunting trips with him, lavish parties, the business lessons he passed down. They were the beloved, acknowledged sons, and I was just a shadow in the corner of the church, unmentioned. But the worst was yet to come. As my mother and I approached to lay flowers by my father's coffin, the atmosphere in the church grew stifling. Selina stepped forward, her smile as cold as ice. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp as a blade. "This isn't a place for people like you." The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on us. Alvin stepped forward, tall and arrogant. "The bastard," he sneered, loud enough for the entire church to hear. "You think you have a right to be here? You're a disgrace to my father." Kason stood behind him, smirking, his eyes dripping with contempt. "And her," he pointed at my mother. "Just a cheap woman who dared to dream of being part of the Holloway family." I heard my mother take a deep breath, but she stood tall, refusing to bow her head. I wanted to scream, to punch Alvin in the face, to defend my mother. But I just stood there, my fists clenched, swallowing every ounce of humiliation. My mother took my hand and whispered, "Don't, Murphy. We don't need to stoop to their level." But I knew her heart was breaking too. We left the church amid whispers and mocking stares. The funeral, meant to be a place for me to say goodbye to my father, became a new wound, deeper than all the scars of my childhood. As my mother and I stepped outside, the rain still fell cold against my skin. I looked at her, saw her eyes glistening, but she managed a faint smile. "We did the right thing, my son," she said. But inside me, a storm was brewing, and I knew the days ahead would be far from easy. A few days after the funeral, my mother and I received a letter from my father's lawyer. A reading of the will was to take place at the Holloway mansion, and we were required to attend. I stared at the letter, the deep red seal of the law firm, a stark reminder of the distance between me and that family. "You don't have to go," my mother said, her voice gentle but laced with worry. "They won't treat you kindly." But I shook my head. A part of me needed to know if my father, even just once, had thought of me. Even if it was just a small inheritance or a belated apology, I needed a sign that I wasn't merely a mistake in his life. That day, I drove my mother to the Holloway mansion. It was as imposing as ever, a proud fortress with white marble columns and glittering stained glass windows catching the faint morning sunlight. As we passed through the gates, I felt like I was stepping into an arena. Luxury cars filled the courtyard and reporters, as always, gathered outside, cameras poised to capture any hint of drama. I heard their whispers. "The bastard's here. Wonder if he'll get anything?" I bowed my head, trying not to let their words touch me. Inside, the grand meeting room was flooded with light from crystal chandeliers. Selena sat at the center, her elegant black dress hugging her frame, her gaze sharp enough to pierce through me. Alvin and Casson flanked her like guards protecting their mother's throne. Others, lawyers, company staff, and distant relatives, sat in rows, their eyes a mix of curiosity and contempt. My mother and I chose a secluded corner, trying not to draw attention, but I knew that was impossible. We were the focal point of every stare. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a steady, low voice, stood and began reading the will. He listed my father's assets: a $400 million empire, the mansion, company shares, properties stretching from New York to California, bank accounts, a collection of vintage cars, even a luxury yacht docked somewhere in Europe. With each item mentioned, I saw Alvin and Casson exchange triumphant glances. Selena sat upright, her lips pressed tightly as if she already knew everything. Then the lawyer announced, "The entirety of the official estate will be divided equally between Mr. Jetson Holloway's two legitimate sons, Alvin Holloway and Casson Holloway." Scattered but smug applause filled the room. Alvin smirked, shooting me a look that said, "See, you're nothing." Casson laughed loudly, clapping his brother on the shoulder as if they'd just won a game. Selena tilted her head high, her gaze sweeping over me like I was a speck of dust not worth noticing. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm, gripping my mother's hand under the table. Then the lawyer paused. He cleared his throat and pulled out a white envelope with my name clearly written on it: Murphy Dalton. The room grew stiflingly tense. "This is a separate provision in Mr. Jetson Holloway's will designated for Mr. Murphy Dalton," he said, his voice slightly hesitant. "No assets have been bequeathed to him. Only a personal letter." Casson's mocking laugh cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "A piece of scrap paper," he said loudly, prompting chuckles from the room. Alvin shook his head, his eyes dripping with sarcasm. "Poor little bastard," he said loud enough for me to hear. Selena smiled, a cold, victorious smile. "I told you Jetson never considered him a son," she said, her voice soft but venomous. I felt the heat rise to my face, but I couldn't speak. I just sat there, feeling each invisible stab at my pride. The lawyer walked over and handed me the envelope. My hands trembled as I took it. The letter inside felt light as a leaf but heavy as the world. I wanted to tear it open right there, to scream that I didn't need anything from the father who abandoned me. But my mother's gaze stopped me. She placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Keep it. If your father left it for you, it must mean something." Her voice was firm. I stood, the envelope in hand, and walked out of the room under mocking stares and stifled laughter. Alvin and Casson were still chuckling as if I were a cheap joke. Selena looked at me, her eyes saying, "You never belonged here." I wanted to turn back, to scream in their faces that I didn't need their money, that I didn't need the Holloway name. But I didn't. I just held my mother's hand tightly and left the mansion feeling like I had just walked away from a battlefield. On the drive back to Newark, I sat in the car, the envelope still tucked in my jacket pocket. I hadn't opened it, hadn't dared to. Inside me was a whirlwind of disappointment, hurt, and an unshakable curiosity. What had my father written? A belated apology? A family secret he couldn't reveal in life? Or just a meaningless piece of paper like the way the world saw me? In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow. I still went to the warehouse, counting crates and checking invoices, but my mind was adrift. The letter haunted me. Every night I thought about opening it, but an invisible fear held me back. fear that it contained only empty words or worse, my father's final silence. I was angry at him, angry for leaving me a puzzle instead of answers. But more than that, I was angry at myself for still holding on to a sliver of hope that he had left something for me. Not money, but a sign that I had meant something to him. That night, Newark was shrouded in thick, icy fog. I left the warehouse late, my shoulders aching from a long day. The road home was deserted, the dim yellow streetlights flickering like ghostly eyes in the mist. I walked, my breath steaming in the cold, hands shoved deep into my pockets to ward off the chill. The sound of my shoes scraping the sidewalk was the only noise, until a sharp metallic screech cut through the air behind me. Before I could turn, a hand as hard as steel grabbed my collar, yanking me backward. I crashed to the ground, my head slamming against the pavement, pain shooting through me. A raspy voice growled, "Don't move, you bastard." I tried to shout, but another hand clamped over my mouth, the smell of leather and burnt tobacco assaulting my senses. I thrashed, my legs kicking wildly, but dark figures surrounded me. 4 men, tall and broad, dressed in black from head to toe. Their faces were hidden behind masks, revealing only cold, merciless eyes. One of them, taller than the rest with a scar at the corner of his eye, held a gleaming dagger, its blade catching the streetlight's glow. "Shut up, or I'll slit your throat right now," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous like a predator stalking prey. My blood ran cold, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. Before I could process what was happening, a coarse sack was thrown over my head, plunging my world into stifling darkness. I was dragged, stumbling, and then shoved into the back of a vehicle. The engine roared to life, the stench of diesel and sweat making me gag. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as muffled gasps. "Take him," a deeper voice commanded. I heard a mocking laugh, the clink of metal. My mind spun, fear choking every thought. Who were they? Robbers? Assassins? What did they want with me? The journey seemed endless. The vehicle jolted over rough roads, each bump sending pain through my body. Finally, it stopped. I was yanked out, my bare feet hitting freezing ground. A metal door screeched open and I was shoved forward, my knees slamming into concrete as I fell. The sack was ripped off and dim light from a dangling bulb stung my eyes. I blinked, trying to focus. We were in an abandoned warehouse, its walls stained with mold, the air heavy with the smell of oil and rust. Old tilted shelves were covered in cobwebs. The 4 men stood before me. The scarred one, clearly the leader, held the dagger, its blade glinting like a promise of death. Another, shorter with dirty blonde hair, toyed with a pistol, his finger brushing the trigger. The other 2 stood behind, their muscular frames looming, their eyes like those of starving wolves. "Sit," the scarred man ordered, pointing to a rusted metal chair in the middle of the room. Before I could react, I was shoved down, ropes biting into my wrists and ankles, cutting into my skin. They searched me, rough hands digging into my pockets, tearing the lining of my jacket. "Where's the letter?" the scarred man growled, his voice thick with anger. My heart raced, stunned. The letter? How did they know? I shook my head, stammering, "I didn't bring it." A fist slammed into my stomach, the pain doubling me over, the ropes making it hard to breathe. "Don't lie," the blonde one shouted, his voice sharp as a blade. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of cigarettes. "The letter," he said, his voice icy. "Where is it? What did Jetson write in it?" I froze, my mind blank. I don't know," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I haven't opened it." The scarred man let out a dry, mocking laugh like the sound of breaking bones. "You think I'm stupid, you bastard?" He swung his fist and it connected with my face, the force snapping my head back. Blood filled my mouth, sharp and metallic, as pain exploded. My ears rang. "You have 1 minute to talk," he snarled. "What's in the letter?" "What do you know about the will?" I shook my head, tears mixing with blood, trying to shout, "I don't know. I swear." But my words only fueled their anger. The blonde raised his gun, pressing it against my forehead. "Want me to blow your brains out?" he asked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Cold sweat drenched me, my breath stopping, my heart pounding like it would explode. They took turns tormenting me. Another grabbed my hair, yanking my head back, shouting in my face, "You think you can hide it? What did Jetson leave you? Talk." I coughed, choking, trying to stay conscious, but fear and pain were swallowing me whole. They knew about the will, about the letter. That meant someone in the Holloway family was behind this. Selena? Alvin? Kasen? All three? But why? What was in that letter that made them willing to kill me? I hadn't opened it, didn't know anything, but now I feared that what my father left me wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a secret big enough to make me a target. I felt death closing in, each passing second shrinking my hope of survival. I wanted to scream that I didn't have it, that it was safely hidden somewhere else, but my throat was tight, producing only incoherent gasps. Fear choked me, my heart pounding as if it would burst through my chest. I thought of my mother, realizing I might never see her again, and my heart shattered. Just then, when despair had nearly consumed me, a sharp noise echoed from a dark corner of the warehouse. Like metal striking concrete, a sudden sound that startled both me and my captors. The scarred man spun around, his dagger still pressed against my throat, his eyes darting nervously. "What the hell was that?" he growled. Before anyone could react, a small figure burst from the shadows, moving like lightning. All I caught was a glimpse of neatly tied hair and movements so precise they were chilling. A perfectly aimed kick struck the blond man's wrist, sending his pistol skidding across the concrete floor with a piercing clang. The scarred man shouted, swinging his dagger at the figure, but they ducked low, spinning in a deadly dance, and in an instant a punch to his jaw sent him sprawling, the knife clattering to the ground. The other two men charged, growling like beasts, but they stood no chance. The figure, a woman, small but fierce as a storm, drew an iron baton from her waist, striking the nearest muscular man's head, felling him like a tree. The last man lunged, but a spinning kick to his chest sent him crashing backward, groaning on the floor. It all happened in less than 10 seconds, so fast I could only gape, my heart racing wildly. The swaying light illuminated the face of my rescuer. I froze, stunned. "Mom," I whispered, unable to believe my eyes. It was her, Lennon Dalton, the frail woman who always wore worn-out dresses, the mother I knew as gentle, enduring endless gossip to raise me. But now she stood there, slightly out of breath, her eyes icy, gripping the iron baton like a warrior. The hulking men lay groaning on the floor as she swiftly cut the ropes binding me. "Murphy, quick, let's go," she said, her voice low but firm, as if this wasn't her first time doing this. I stumbled to my feet, my mind a whirlwind. "Mom, how did you—" I couldn't finish the question. She grabbed my hand, pulling me out of the warehouse through a side door into a pitch-black alley. An old car waited outside, its engine still running. "Get in," she ordered, and I obeyed like a machine, still reeling from shock. As the car sped away from the warehouse, I looked at her, searching for the woman who sang me lullabies, who held me when kids mocked me as a bastard. But the woman beside me now was different, strong, decisive, and terrifying. "What have you been hiding from me all these years?" The question echoed in my mind like a hammer, striking the wall of truth I'd never questioned. We stopped at a small rundown house deep in a forest hours from Newark. The house was hidden among towering pines, with only faint moonlight filtering through the branches to light the dirt path. My mother locked the front door with 2 deadbolts, checking each window with the caution of someone who had lived in danger. Inside, the house was nearly empty. A worn armchair, a small wooden table, and a cold fireplace. I sank into the chair, my hands still trembling, the wounds on my face and stomach throbbing. Dried blood clung to my lips, and each breath was a sharp stab of pain. My head buzzed as if everything, the kidnapping, the brutal men, and my gentle mother turning into a warrior, was just a nightmare. My mother knelt before me, her eyes softening but still carrying an unwavering resolve I'd never seen. She pulled a small first aid kit from her backpack, opening it with practiced ease. "Let me see," she said, her voice gentle but commanding. She wiped the blood from my face with an alcohol-soaked gauze, making me hiss in pain. Sorry, sweetheart, she whispered, her hands tender yet steady, as if she'd done this 100 times. She bandaged the cut on my forehead, then checked the bruises on my stomach, her eyes flickering with pain as she saw the marks of violence on my body. They hurt you badly, didn't they? She asked, her voice catching. I nodded, tears welling up, not from the pain, but from the shock of seeing my mother, the woman I thought I knew, as a complete stranger. Mom, I said, my voice hoarse, what's going on? Who are you? She paused, setting the gauze down, and looked me straight in the eyes. Her gaze was no longer the soft one I knew, but filled with buried secrets. She sat in the chair across from me, taking a deep breath as if preparing to shed a mask she'd worn for years. Calm down, she said, her voice low. The truth is, I was an undercover FBI agent, she began, her voice steady but heavy, each word carrying a weight. I froze, my mind reeling. An FBI agent? My mother, the woman who'd been called an abandoned mistress her whole life? She continued, her eyes distant, as if revisiting a past she'd tried to bury. My mission was to infiltrate your father's company, the Holloway Corporation, to investigate shady financial activities. I did that for years, living in the shadows, reporting everything about his empire. Money laundering, bribery, secret deals with people you don't want to know. But then, I fell in love with Jetson. I knew it was wrong, forbidden in my line of work, but I couldn't stop my heart. And then, I got pregnant with you. I sat there, feeling like the world had collapsed. My mother, an agent? Someone who lived in a world of conspiracies and danger? I thought of the days she worked at the library, sold goods at the market, always smiling despite the neighbors' scorn. Was it all a facade? Because I loved him, because of you, I walked away from the case, she said, her voice trembling, her eyes glistening as if holding back tears. I chose to leave it all behind, to live with the gossip, to raise you safely. I didn't want you dragged into that world. A world of blood and shadows, but I always knew Jetson didn't just leave a simple letter. That envelope, it might contain secrets tied to the illegal activities I was investigating. I stared at her, my heart breaking. All those years she had sacrificed everything. Her honor, her career, her life, to protect me. Every snide remark, every contemptuous glance from neighbors she endured in silence, just to give me a normal life. But now my father's secret had pulled us into the storm she'd tried to escape. I knew they'd come for you, she said, her eyes resolute but shimmering with deep worry. She took my hand, her own trembling slightly yet still warm, as it was when she held me as a child. For the first time I saw her not just as my gentle mother, but as a fierce woman, ready to face the world for me. But in my heart a question loomed like a dark shadow. What was in that letter? And why did my mother, with all the secrets she'd hidden, believe it was worth risking our lives? I squeezed her hand, feeling the blood still seeping from the wound on my face. But the deepest pain wasn't physical. It was the realization that my life and my mother's would never be the same again. We left the safe house in the forest as dawn broke, the faint morning light piercing through thick fog. My mother drove, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as if wary of pursuers. I sat beside her, my mind still reeling from what had happened. The kidnapping, the cold-eyed men, and the image of my mother, the woman I thought I knew, revealed as an undercover FBI agent. I wanted to ask her 100 questions, but my throat was dry. I could only clutch the armrest, trying to suppress the fear still screaming in my chest. When we returned to Newark, our small apartment came into view under the pale morning light. But as my mother pushed open the door, she froze, her body tensing like a taut string. I peered over her shoulder and my heart stopped. The apartment was a wreck. Drawers had been yanked open, belongings strewn across the floor, the wardrobe ransacked. Even the mattress on my mother's bed slashed to pieces. Someone had broken in, and they hadn't just searched. They'd destroyed, as if frantically hunting for something. The letter, I whispered, my voice trembling. My mother turned to me, her eyes sharp. "Where did you put it, Murphy?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. I swallowed hard, a mix of relief and fear washing over me. "I didn't leave it here," I said. "I hid it in the shed out back." She nodded, saying nothing more, but I saw her shoulders relax slightly. I knew what she was thinking. If the letter had been here, it would already be in the hands of our enemies. We stepped into the backyard, where the old wooden shed stood quietly among overgrown weeds. That shed was my childhood, where I'd played, dreamed of a real family, and hid from the cruel taunts. My father had helped me build it during his rare, secretive visits. He'd brought planks and nails, and we'd hammered them together, laughing in those fleeting moments when I felt he was truly my father. Now the shed still stood, weathered but resilient, like a memory that refused to fade. I knelt and pried up a loose floorboard. The envelope was still there, untouched, sealed in a plastic bag to keep out moisture. I picked it up, feeling its lightness like a leaf, yet its weight like the world. My mother stood behind me, her eyes softening but unable to hide a lingering tension. "Open it, Murphy," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as they brushed the envelope's edge. After years of living in the shadow of being a bastard, I'd learned not to hope. But now, standing before my father's final secret, I couldn't stop my heart from pounding. We returned to the apartment, sitting at the kitchen table amid the chaos. I tore open the envelope, each movement slow, as if afraid that what lay inside would change everything. A single sheet of paper, folded in half, revealed my father's shaky handwriting under the dim yellow light. I took a deep breath and began to read, my voice faltering as the words sank into my mind. "Murphy, my son, if you're reading this, I'm no longer in this world. I know I don't deserve to be called your father. I've caused you and your mother to live in shame, enduring hardships that I should have prevented and protected you from. My love for you and your mother was real, but I was a coward, too weak to publicly acknowledge you. I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart. I didn't want you to be pulled into the vortex of power I built. This wealth, this empire came at a cost far greater than you can imagine. But I want you to know the truth. In a safe deposit box at a private bank in Manhattan, the address and code attached below, there are documents I've kept hidden for years. They hold the truth you need to know, about me, about the family, about what I've done. Be careful, Murphy. The truth always comes with danger. I love you, though I never said it enough. Jetson Holloway." I stopped reading, tears welling up. My father's voice, even through those words, echoed in my mind, warm yet filled with pain. He apologized. He said he loved me. But more than that, he left a secret, a safe deposit box, a truth he called dangerous. I looked at the paper where a small note was pinned, listing a Manhattan bank address and a string of numbers, the code. I handed it to my mother and she read it, her eyes darkening as if she'd anticipated something. "They kidnapped you and trashed our home for this," she said, her voice low. "They know Jetson left something for you and they won't stop." I looked at her, my heart heavy. "Mom, what's in that safe?" I asked, my voice trembling. She shook her head, her gaze resolute but laced with worry. "I'm not sure, but if Jetson hid it, it's tied to what I was investigating. His company's illegal activities. We need to get there as soon as possible." I nodded, though fear still gripped my chest. My father's letter wasn't just an apology. It was a key to a truth he'd hidden his entire life. My mother and I looked at each other, silent but both understanding. We had stepped onto a dangerous path, and once that door was opened, nothing would ever be the same. My mother stood up, her eyes cold and sharp. "We're going to that bank, Murphy," she said, her voice low but resolute. "But this time we won't go alone." I swallowed hard, my mind flashing back to the men in the warehouse. The icy blade pressed against my throat. "Mom, what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a phone and dialed a long sequence of numbers with steady, deliberate fingers, movements so practiced they seemed second nature. I stared, about to ask, when she said softly, "Old friends," her eyes flicking to me as a brief explanation. "They're coming, and they'll help us." Within a few hours, she had contacted a group, former colleagues from her days as an undercover FBI agent. They arrived at the apartment at midnight, 3 men and 1 woman, all exuding the cautious air of people accustomed to living in the shadows. The leader, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes, introduced himself curtly. "I'm Ray. Lennon says you need an escort." I nodded, too intimidated to ask questions, my heart pounding. This was my mother's world, a world I never knew existed, where brief handshakes and tense glances replaced words. We left Newark before dawn in a convoy of 2 sleek black SUVs. My mother and I sat in the back vehicle with Ray and a woman named Carla, a sharp-eyed agent with short hair and a brisk stride. The air in the car was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and the faint crackle of coded radio chatter I couldn't decipher. I stared out the window as Newark's familiar streets gave way to Manhattan's dazzling lights. But this time, the city didn't awe me. Instead, I felt a chilling sense of danger, a cold shiver down my spine as if I were being hunted. My mother sat beside me, her hand gripping a concealed pistol under her jacket. I looked at her, searching for the mother who once held me when I cried, but now she was a warrior, ready to face any threat. Just minutes after we hit the highway, Carla tensed. "We've got a tail," she said, her voice low but sharp, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "You sure?" Ray asked, his grip tightening on the wheel. Carla nodded, grabbing the radio. "Target vehicle, black sedan, unclear plates. Prepare to lose them." My mother glanced at the mirror, her eyes cold as steel. "Ray, do it," she ordered, her voice low but commanding. Ray nodded, relaying instructions via radio to the lead vehicle. Suddenly, the convoy sped up, veering onto a side road and weaving through an abandoned industrial area. The sedan stayed on us, but Carla and Ray worked like a machine. They slowed, letting the sedan close in, then abruptly turned into a narrow alley, catching the pursuers off guard. By the time we circled back to the main road, the sedan was gone. "Done," Carla said, her voice calm, but I saw my mother still clutching her gun, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "We need to hurry." I swallowed hard, the sense of danger like an invisible blade hanging over my head. We reached the private bank in Manhattan as the sun rose, its pale golden light glinting off the building's glass walls. This wasn't an ordinary bank, no lines of customers or smiling tellers. Instead, a guard in a black suit scrutinized our documents with a wary gaze. I presented the note my father left, with the address and code, and after a few minutes of verification, a bank employee led us to the basement, where safe deposit boxes were stored in a cold, steel-lined vault. I stood before the box bearing my father's number, my hands trembling as I entered the code. My mother stood behind me with Ray and Carla guarding the door. The lock clicked and the door swung open. I took a deep breath, bracing for anything, money, gold, or some lavish Holloway family heirloom. But what I found wasn't what I expected. Just a small metal box filled with documents. Contracts, handwritten notes, a USB drive, and a few audio cassettes. I picked them up, feeling as if I were holding a bomb. My mother stepped forward, scanning the documents with a sharp gaze. "This is what I was investigating," she said, her voice low. Jetson ran his company with 2 faces. One legitimate, one deeply illegal. Money laundering, bribery, smuggling. He hid it all but kept these as evidence. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Why did he leave this to me?" I asked, my voice faltering. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes softening. "Because he trusted you, Murphy. He knew you'd do the right thing. He wanted you to decide, keep it secret or expose it all." I stood stunned, clutching the box of documents. My father, the man I thought was a coward, had entrusted me with a secret that could topple the Holloway empire. But with that secret came unimaginable danger. The men in the warehouse, the car tailing us, they showed someone was willing to kill to keep this buried. I looked at my mother, searching for answers, but she only shook her head. "We need time, Murphy," she said. "But you have to decide." We left the bank, the box of documents hidden in a backpack, escorted by Ray and Carla. As we climbed into the car, one thing became clear. I was no longer just the despised bastard. I held the fate of the Holloway family in my hands, and the truth my father had concealed his entire life. The SUV rolled through Manhattan's bustling streets, the city lights glinting like cold, distant stars. I sat in the back, the backpack heavy on my lap, as if it held an entire world. Inside were the documents, contracts, and recordings, evidence of the dark underbelly of the Holloway empire. Each page, each audio clip, was a piece of the truth my father had chosen me to protect. But what was I supposed to do with it? Stay silent, preserving his legacy, or expose it all, even if it meant destroying everything? The air in the car was taut as a bowstring. My mother sat beside me, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror, still vigilant like a warrior. Ray drove, his hands steady on the wheel, while Carla sat beside him, her gaze focused as if escorting a high-profile dignitary. I sat in silence, my mind reeling. My father's letter echoed in my thoughts, his shaky handwriting, his belated apology, and his warning. The cost of this wealth is too high. I thought of the years spent in the shadow of being a bastard, the taunts from Alvin and Kaysen, Selena's cold stares. I thought of my mother, who had sacrificed her entire life to protect me, enduring scorn that my father should have borne. And then I thought of my father, the man I both loved and hated, who left me not money but the burden of truth. I gripped the backpack tightly, and a resolute decision ignited in my chest. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse but firm, "I want to turn it all over to the FBI." She turned to me, her eyes flashing with surprise before softening, as if she had known I'd choose this path. "Are you sure, Murphy?" she asked, her voice gentle but weighty. "If you do this, the Holloway family will collapse. Alvin, Kaysen, Selena, they'll lose everything." I nodded, though my heart ached. "I don't want to live with this secret," I said. "I don't want to be part of what he tried to escape. I want to choose my own path." Those words felt like a clean cut, severing the ties binding me to the Holloway name. For the first time in my life, I felt a weight lift, as if I'd shed the bastard shadow the world had cast on me. But I also knew this decision would unleash a storm. My mother smiled, a sad but proud smile. "You truly are my son," she said, then pulled out her phone and dialed an unfamiliar number. "We have evidence on Holloway," she said into the phone, her voice low. "Send a team. We're on our way." Just hours later, at a small hotel on the outskirts of Newark, a group of senior FBI agents arrived. They wore black suits, their eyes sharp, carrying the gravity of those who knew they were touching a major case. I placed the box of documents on the table, my hands trembling as I signed the handover papers. A female agent with silver hair and a stern voice looked at me with something close to respect. "You're doing a very brave thing, Dalton," she said. "But from now on, you're a key witness. Be prepared." I nodded, though fear still lingered in my heart. I was no longer just Murphy Dalton, the quiet warehouse manager. I had become the holder of a key to a case that could shake the nation. The FBI moved swiftly. Within days, the news exploded like a bomb. Bank accounts, properties, company shares, everything under the Holloway name was frozen for the investigation. A federal court launched an official inquiry, and the media went into a frenzy. Headlines screamed across the news: "Holloway empire collapses. Shocking financial secrets revealed. Illegitimate son destroys Holloway legacy." I read those words on my phone, my heart pounding. From a despised stain, I had become the center of public attention, a key figure in a media storm. Reporters swarmed our apartment, cameras flashing, but my mother, with her agent instincts, had already whisked me away before they could find us. Meanwhile, the Holloway family was caught in a legal whirlwind. Selena, the woman who once looked at me like I was dust, appeared on TV with a pale face, her eyes panicked as reporters hounded her. Alvin and Kasen, the brothers who called me bastard, now faced a barrage of charges. They lost everything: the luxury cars, the lavish mansion, control of their father's empire. I saw them on the news, disheveled, their eyes burning with hatred, and part of me felt a pang of pain. They were my brothers, even if only by half, and I had destroyed their world. But then I remembered their insults, my mother's silent endurance of a lifetime of scorn because of my father's cowardice. And I knew I had made the right choice. Turning over the evidence wasn't easy. It hurt, knowing I had erased my father's legacy, the empire he built with his life. But it also set me free. For the first time, I was no longer Jetson Holloway's bastard. In just a few weeks, the Holloway family crumbled like a sandcastle before the tide. The FBI dug into every corner of the financial empire my father had built. All of the Holloway family's assets were seized, their lavish cars confiscated. Alvin and Kasen, the brothers who once saw me as a stain, became defendants in the investigation. I saw them on the evening news, no longer in tailored suits or with their arrogant gazes. Alvin, his hair disheveled, was led out of a courthouse, his eyes vacant. Kasen, head bowed before a swarm of cameras, looked pale and hollow, like a man stripped of his soul. They had lost everything: power, wealth, prestige, things they once thought untouchable. Selena, the woman who once stood at the pinnacle as the tycoon's wife, became a symbol of failure. I saw her in a tabloid, her once gleaming blonde hair now disheveled, her eyes frantic as reporters mobbed her outside the Holloway mansion. "What do you think of the illegitimate son who destroyed your family?" a reporter pressed. Selena didn't answer, turning away, but I saw her shoulders tremble. Part of me felt a pang of pity, not for her, but for the cruelty of the truth. The Holloway family, with all its glamour, had built its reputation on dirty secrets, and now they were paying the price. While the nation buzzed with the Holloway scandal, I chose to retreat. I returned to Newark, to our small apartment, now tidied but still bearing the scars of the break-in. I went back to work at the warehouse, counting crates and checking invoices, but this time with a different mindset. I was no longer hiding from the bastard shadow. I lived modestly, spending time with my mother, the woman who had sacrificed her life to shield me. In the evenings, we sat in the living room sipping hot tea, and she shared stories of her youth before the world branded her the abandoned mistress. I listened, and for the first time I felt I truly belonged here. Not to the Holloway family, but to this humble home, where it was just my mother and me. 2 months passed. While the outside world still reeled from the Holloway secrets, my mother and I lived quietly in our Newark apartment. Then my 30th birthday arrived, simple as always. I woke up, made coffee, and was about to head to the backyard to fix the old shed when the phone rang. A stranger's voice, deep and professional, came through. "Mr. Murphy Dalton? I'm Daniel Carter, your father's lawyer. I need to meet you to discuss an important matter." I frowned, my heart racing, a mix of suspicion and unease rising. Another secret? After everything, the kidnapping, the safe, the fall of the Holloway family, I wasn't sure I could handle another shock. But I agreed to meet him at a small cafe on a quiet Newark street. The cafe was unassuming, tucked away with fogged-up windows and a few worn wooden tables. I arrived early, sitting in a corner, nervously stirring my coffee to quell my unease. Daniel Carter appeared on time, a middle-aged man with neatly combed silver hair and calm, piercing eyes that seemed to see through me. He wore a simple gray suit, but his confident stride suggested someone accustomed to handling big matters. He sat across from me, placing a black leather briefcase on the table, and offered a polite but reserved smile. "Thank you for coming, Murphy," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made me tense. He opened the briefcase, pulling out a thick folder with a dark blue cover secured with a rubber band. "This is a trust fund your father, Jetson Holloway, set up for you," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "It was to be activated when you turned 30 per his wishes." I froze, my hands trembling as I touched the folder. My fingers flipped through the pages, stopping at a bolded figure. $50 million. It was clean, legitimate money, safely invested over years in stocks and bonds. Not dirty funds from the Holloway Empire's money laundering or bribery, but a gift my father had meticulously prepared, as if he knew one day I'd need it to start anew. I looked at Carter, struggling to find words, my throat tight. Why did my father do this? I asked, my voice faltering. Carter tilted his head, his eyes softening as if he understood the emotions swirling within me. Jetson Holloway was a complex man, he said. He couldn't publicly acknowledge you, but he loved you in his own way. This trust is his final proof of that. He wanted you to have a future, unbound by his mistakes. I sat there, clutching the folder, my mind reeling. For years I'd lived believing I was a mistake, a blemish in my father's life. But now, I held proof that he had thought of me, planned for me, even if he never dared say it in life. Tears welled up, but I held them back, not wanting Carter to see my weakness. I thought of my mother, the years she endured scorn, and my father's letter with its shaky apology. This was his final affirmation that he loved me, loved my mother, even if he lacked the courage to face the world. I left the cafe and returned home, my mind in a whirl. My mother was preparing a simple birthday celebration, a homemade cake, a few candles, and her warm smile. I told her about the trust fund, the $50 million. She hugged me, her eyes glistening, her voice choked. I always knew Jetson didn't abandon us, Murphy. He loved you in his own way. I held her tightly, feeling an invisible weight lift. Her sacrifices, the years of enduring gossip, were now rewarded. And for the first time I felt truly acknowledged by my father. Not through words, but through this gift, a new beginning to build a life free from the Holloway shadow. That night in the flickering candlelight, my mother and I raised our glasses, not to celebrate wealth, but to toast freedom. I looked at her, the woman who had given me everything, and knew that with or without $50 million, she was my greatest treasure. My father had left me a gift, but my mother was the one who taught me how to live worthy of it. One autumn afternoon, a few months after my 30th birthday, my mother and I decided to visit my father's grave. The golden leaves fell gently, blanketing the path in a quiet carpet under the pale sunlight. My mother walked beside me, her worn coat hugging her frail frame, but her eyes shone with a quiet pride. I carried a bouquet of white lilies, the flowers my mother said my father had loved, and felt a heavy weight in my heart as we stopped before the stone slab etched with Jetson Holloway's name. I stood silently before his grave, unable to speak. The autumn wind swept through, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the stillness of a world free from strife. I gazed at the inscription on the tombstone, a flood of emotions surging in my chest. Anger for how he left my mother and me to live in shame, enduring scorn that he should have borne. Pity, for I knew he too had suffered, torn between his love for us and a cowardice he could never overcome. Regret, for I would never have the chance to hear him say, "You are my son," before the world. And a belated gratitude for the trust fund, the letter, and the truth he left me, though it came too late. My mother placed her hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm, as if saying, "You've chosen the right path." I turned to her, seeing her eyes glisten, not with sadness, but with a deep sense of solace. She said nothing, but I knew she understood the storm raging within me. I knelt before the grave, placing the lilies on the stone, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for giving me the chance to choose." Those words didn't erase the scars of the past, but they felt like a bridge connecting me to the man I had loved and hated. I sat there for a long time, letting the autumn breeze caress my face, letting my thoughts settle. Power and wealth, if built on sin, would inevitably crumble. Like the Holloway Empire, like what my father tried to warn me about in his letter. Despite being despised, labeled a bastard, every person can choose to stand for justice and truth, as I did when I turned the evidence over to the FBI. And true strength lies not in inherited wealth, but in the courage to decide who you will become. I had chosen my path, not to prove anything to the world, but to live true to myself. I stood, looked at my mother, and smiled. "Mom," I said, my voice soft but certain, "I think the greatest thing Dad left me wasn't money or power. It was the chance to choose a different path." She nodded, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You did it, Murphy," she said, her voice catching. "And I know Jetson is proud of you too." We walked out of the cemetery, our shadows stretching long across the leaf-strewn path. The afternoon sunlight gently embraced us like a promise of a new beginning. I didn't know what the future held or where the trust fund would lead me. But as I held my mother's hand, I knew I had found freedom. Not in wealth, not in fame, but in my own heart, where I had learned to forgive, to love, and to live without the Holloway name defining me.